Well, welcome, and this is my really first time doing a video such as this. Usually I'm on the other side of the camera and or speaking live, so if y'all bear with me if I'm a little awkward with the transitions and what have you. But I just wanted to share with you my work in terms of recognition of the Fletcher exhibition, which is now in view at the Reece Museum in Johnson City. I am a photographer with a graphic design background as well, so my work tends to be very design oriented, and I really look for key elements in my images to explain or to characterize or to embellish the theme, and I just wanted to kind of share. There are about 60 images that I have. Some I'll go through quickly, but one thing I want you to see in terms of a common denominator or a thread through all of these images is that I really believe in focusing on having it on one thing, one person, and then everything else complements. And that's pretty true except when you get into sort of the crowd images. But in this case, this image here that you're seeing on my cover is a young man, a young boy, protesting the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012. And here he holds a sign. I'm assuming he did all the drawings. And one thing about protests, it often involves art. And that's one of the themes that I guess that I want to speak upon throughout this series. And the young man is staring at us just dead on, and there is no mistaking who's in charge of this scene. But then we see the upper images, drawn images, partial sign, things that the Skittles and the scene or image of Trayvon Martin. And it just really makes an impression. The dichotomy between the two, or the juxtaposition, I should say, is very, very strong. And so I just really enjoy seeing this image because it says so much to me in terms of the frustration a young man would have being even younger than Trayvon Martin and going through this type of exercise. I'm diverting. This is actually at a Trayvon Martin protest in Washington, D.C. But I saw this woman, I don't know how young she is, but wearing all white. She had white hair. The only color that existed pretty much were her eyes and lipstick. And she had this sign about violence against women. And she walked around quietly throughout the protest period. I just thought it was very strong and powerful in the way she presented herself and the sign that she carried. And again, the relationship between the two are very strong. This is a man in Washington, D.C., right outside the White House. And he just sat calmly on the bench and had his altered American flag flowing in the background. And he just sat there and greeted people. And it was very interesting because even though I'm familiar with the flag, I'm still not quite sure its meaning. But he, as you see, very firmly and affirmatively, he pretty much means business. He looks quite serious, but yet a peaceful person. And this was his protest. I'm sharing with you an image that I did not do, and I cannot tell you exactly who may have photographed this particular image, but it's iconic, and I Am a Man protests of the garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee. And you think of, there have been signs for protests well before that time, but in terms of the African American community, to use signs such as these to make a statement and make a collective statement really is strong here. And in my memory, I don't recall seeing a lot of sign making for protests prior to this in the African American community. I will not say it's the beginning, but it certainly is one of the more successful uses of signage in making protest, civil protest. This is an image from the Million Man March that took place in 1995. The man had a big shirt, sweatshirt saying America with stars. And as he's drinking the water and that one man is staring in his direction, it sort of tells the tale of our very strong presence in this country and our history. And he makes a claim, a stake of claim of being an American. And I feel that this really said a lot, particularly for this particular movement. This is the funeral of Michael Brown, who was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri. And this was outside after the funeral, where this young man made a painting or drawing of Michael Brown and paraded around. There weren't many signs at all at the funeral, or signs of protest, but he made this to pay homage to Michael Brown. This is very iconic for me because the sort of hands up, arms up posturing that has become iconic for the African American male movement, in terms of how one is treated by the police, or could be treated by the police, I should say. He stood there in 100-degree plus heat. He was out there the whole time. Only so many people could go in and attend the funeral of Michael Brown. But he was out there waiting as we exited the church, and well, many, many, many others. And he just stood there with his slacker pants and what have you, and no shirt. And he stood there and raised his arms in defiance. And what's in terms of continuing that theme, there were quite a few vehicles actually, but this particular one, which had gull-wing doors, I guess they were retrofitted to this car, they have the same gesture of hands up. And so I thought it was quite symbolic in terms of, and he drove down the street this way in front of the church. This I found very interesting because this man or person literally had a mannequin on the back of his truck, extended, floating in air. and it has no justice, no peace. I thought it was quite interesting. He was just sitting there as people walked by and drove by, and allowed his mannequin, along with no justice, no peace, to be exhibited on the street. I don't know if he drove this car, but afterwards with the mannequin, I imagine it was just for that particular spot. But I thought it made a very poignant statement. This is a scene in Washington, D.C. for Trayvon Martin. And again, this father figure, or father, held this sign to speak about the sons that were being lost. And I thought it was a very powerful, again, the hand gesture, handprint of paint, save our sons. It makes a very strong, poignant statement. This is the actual site of death for Michael Brown. There was a memorial of flowers and other other things, bears, teddy bears, and bottles and other things. And so he laid there for 4.5 hours in the hot sun, deceased, as the Ferguson police investigated. And it left a very sour impression on the city, because there was no reason for him to be in the street uncovered for 4.5 hours. But they made this memorial which lasted for months. And this is the one position of it, one vision of it. This is another perspective of the memorial. Actually, there were three, that one was on the curb and one was in the center of the street where Michael Brown perished. And again, they remained there for many, many months. And the flowers were refreshed, and the teddy bears were replaced, and they were maintained until they were taken down. This is another version of a vision of that, with a young man watching. This was another viewpoint of the memorial for Michael Brown. He had his, I don't know what you would refer them as, but they were young men as far as California who chose to man the memorials for extended periods of time during this period of mourning. And that young man with the sign had been there for many weeks. And this is a father and daughter who were visiting from Nashville, some friends of mine. And this was just a morning where the daughter, really felt the moment. And again, you see the juxtaposition of the memorial. And then there was one young man who chose to sit by a improvised cross against the tree, a lone tree near the site, which represents the third memorial for Michael Brown. We moved to Nashville. This is a Black Lives Matter movement sign. And now we're getting into the verbiage of Black Lives Matter. And the saying, again, hands up, becomes an ongoing symbol for the movement. And again, this idea of art design meshing with protest. This was a night protest in front of the police headquarters, and the protesters decided to do a Black Lives Matter sign in 3 parts, a triptych, and put lights on them. It was Christmas time. It was November. There were Christmas lights up, and they decided that the sign needed lights too, and they put them on black backdrops and with white chalk, and lit them with Christmas lights. And you see the matter right there as a couple, and they had a candlelight vigil for those who had been killed by the police. And again, just symbol of color. I thought this woman's red scarf and hat served as a sort of beacon in terms of her participation in the march. And here we go, and we're in front of the Justice Center. And then this sign I thought was very apropos as they crossed that entrance. There were also some effigies of caskets that were carted around in the march, having the names of different individuals who had been passed or who had been accosted or who had encountered the police and did not survive it. This is another casket effigy. I hope I'm using that word properly. Usually that's referring to people. And this is a sign as the people marched downtown in the streets. This sign was carried. And this young man decided his skateboard was enough to show his protest. And he held it up. I am not sure what's on it or it had anything to do with Black Lives Matter, but he felt it was important to show his support at that moment. They had a lie-in in the various corners of cross sections in Nashville. And again, people live representing laying bodies such as Michael Brown and others. And this is one. And I'm going to go through some of these fairly quickly. This is a band member who used his percussion drums as a symbol and part of his laying in the street as a body. And these are others who have also laid together in protest. And again, this was a nighttime protest, so again, the use of the hands up was very prominent for this particular march and ongoing. And the reason I like this image so much is because the juxtaposition of one more that's clear on the sign. We have Black Lives Matter, we presume. And then there's that lone figure next to the Christmas tree. I just felt made a powerful statement. another lie-in. They performed this in several intersections, even on the interstate that evening. And I just thought some things are subtle, and this blue jacket against the cold gray concrete or asphalt really beaconed out to me. It really made a powerful statement, even though maybe that was not his intent, but that certainly became the result. And some people make signs that are so complicated, there's just no way you can read them in passing. But yet, we know they're saying a lot. And oftentimes they're names of people who are deceased, or their statements or stories. And this is the particular situation where I couldn't begin to tell you what that really small type says, but it was important for her to make that statement, and I'm sure people did manage to read it. I think it's something very powerful to see a young white male holding a sign, Black Lives Matter. Certainly, it was unusual, certainly at that time. I think since George Floyd was killed, we saw more of that, but in this time, it was just very unusual to see that. And again, it's a young white woman also holding a Black Lives Matter sign, but in the round plate, which I thought was interesting that she chose to use that to house her sign. And sometimes the gesture and the yellow that I thought was really strong, and just her the way she held the sign up and with enthusiasm. A crowd scene. This is also just a group of young people, I would probably dare say Generation Z, and they had their bikes and casual, but yet they were there to be counted and part of the movement. This was a whole family, a mother, I assume mother, it might be a mother and father and children. I'm not sure of that. The young man next to her looks kind of young to me. But they coordinated their shirts to be a part of this event. And this was a young man just sitting in one of the statues on the Tennessee Legislative Plaza and the War Memorial, and he's holding his sign up proudly. Obviously, this is fairly recent. And then just a young boy, this is boy, the mother and her children coming, and he's holding the sign for the family. It's pretty self-evident. This is one young man who's actually wearing his sign, as he obviously admires new Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, better known as AOC, and as she is a proponent and supporter of the Black Lives Matter, I guess it would feel appropriate that she be represented in some way, and this is his way of doing that. And associating racism with the pandemic, I thought was a very strong statement, because I guess a lot of it holds true. Silence is violence, another strong sign. And here's a young man, I guess, to wear, you know, a beat up American flag on his pant leg, and obviously he's well protected, gloves and mask and what have you, and yet he uses his body as a living sign. Again, the George Floyd cry for help is embellished on this sign. And you know, the juxtaposition of the patrolmen and all of the activity going on in the capital area of Tennessee. And I know that face is a iconic, I'm not sure of the figure, but again, the juxtaposition of the two, and some other things too, and George Floyd there in the one sign on the left, I think makes a very powerful statement. And the singular figure standing above the crowd with the red hair and the Black Power symbol, I thought made a very strong statement as he rides about a lot of people who are wearing black, and he's wearing partially black as well, and his sign is black and white, but yet he stands out with that, and then of course his red hair. And here you have a group of people who are, you know, just in the mix, in part, in the midst of walking. There were several thousand people there that day. And it's funny because I normally don't photograph people who are on the phone. I find that too cliche and a bit of a bore, actually. But I took the exception to this one because she's got a lot going on in terms of outfit, sign, and you know, and statement. So I just decided to make an exception with this particular one. Okay, another strong sign. I think that speaks very strongly, that up. And then the introduction of other languages. And even in Nashville, no less, where we do have a lot of people who have reestablished their lives from other countries in Nashville. And I am not sure what that language is, but again, the fact that they chose to include themselves and to maintain their own language in the protest, I thought was very strong. And this is a young lady with her friends on the steps also. I think the particular participation of young people brought another dimension, just like in the 60s, the young people brought their young energy. And I believe that this is happening in 2020 as well. And this is a man who not only wanted to paint a sign and a flag, but his body as well. And this is the result of that. And I just included this because I just thought the hands up, just the blank yellow palette of what may surely have something on the other side, but having it just blank, I think something is very symbolic to me with that particular image. This is on the Capitol. with the "I Can't Breathe" painted on an American flag. And you have the sunburst, which I thought was quite eloquent. Okay. I'm just going to let this again is a family. And I thought there was something different about "I will breathe" rather than "I can breathe." I will breathe, as though breathing is an option or a focus for the future. I think that says a lot with that particular slide. And we're kind of concluding. I believe this is the last, if not the last, one of the last. But he says, "I love America." Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. And this is one particular image that holds dear to me, because here's a young man who clearly states, "I love my country." And I don't think that is very different than any of the other individuals that are there. They may be angry, they may be upset, they may feel disenfranchised, but I don't think it's ever a question of whose country they love, and that's the love of the country they claim. And I'm trying to remember of the sports player, I think it was one of the Lakers or the coach, who said that we love our country, but our country doesn't love us. And I feel that that is a very poignant reason to protest, to let it be known that that is not acceptable. We need to love each other. I conclude with that image as well because I wanted to leave a sense of optimism. Protests, I think, have noble aims. Even if it falls into destruction, reactive destruction, is that everybody wants peace eventually. And I think as we look at the art form of expressing oneself to get their message across, I think is very, very an important American ideal. And I am just proud that I'm able to capture some of that in my photography work.